The crystal chandelier above cast perfect light on the worst moment of Natasha Warren's life. She stood frozen in the center of the hotel ballroom, cold liquid dripping from her chin onto the emerald green dress she'd chosen so carefully that morning. 200 faces turned toward her. Some gasped. Others whispered. A few pulled out their phones. The red wine had splashed across her chest, stained her face, and now pooled at her feet on the marble floor. Her husband, Henry Caldwell, stood 3 feet away with an empty wine glass in his hand and a cruel smile on his lips. "That's what happens when you embarrass me in front of important people," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You don't belong in this circle, Natasha. You never did. Look at you. Just a simple woman who got lucky when I married you." The woman beside him, his assistant Rebecca, tried to hide her smirk behind her hand. Several of Henry's business associates looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The head of the Investors' Council actually nodded, as if Henry had made a reasonable point. Natasha's hands trembled. Not from shame, though her cheeks burned hot. Not from shock, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands shook from pure rage that she forced herself to contain behind a mask of calm. "You've made your point," she said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. She picked up a napkin from the nearest table and dabbed at her face with controlled movements. "Excuse me." She walked toward the exit with her spine straight and her chin up. Every eye followed her. The whispers started before she even reached the door. By tomorrow, this would be the gossip of every elite social circle in the city. Henry had made sure of that. What none of them knew, what Henry himself didn't know, was that Natasha had planned to leave him tonight anyway. She'd made up her mind 3 weeks ago, had signed the divorce papers that morning, had moved half her personal belongings to her new penthouse yesterday while he was at work. The wine incident just made it easier. No guilt. No second thoughts. No mercy. Natasha pushed through the bathroom doors and locked herself in the largest stall. She pulled out her phone with wine-stained fingers and opened her encrypted messaging app. Her hands no longer shook. Fury had crystallized into something colder and sharper. She typed, "Deal is off. Withdraw all offers immediately. I want every asset liquidated by Monday." The response came in seconds. "Confirmed. Should I notify the board?" "Yes. And prepare the press release. We go public with my identity next week." "Understood." Natasha closed the app and looked at herself in the phone's dark screen. 7 years. 7 years of playing small, staying quiet, supporting Henry's ambitions while hiding her own. 7 years of being the perfect wife while building an empire he knew nothing about. The worst part was that she'd loved him once. Back when he was still working his way up at the investment firm, before the money and success transformed him into someone she barely recognized. She'd watched him change year by year, becoming more arrogant and dismissive. She'd seen him start to look at other women. 6 months ago, she'd confirmed her suspicions about Rebecca. She could have confronted him then. Could have screamed and cried and demanded explanations. Instead, she'd taken a step back and started planning. Because Natasha hadn't built a multi-billion-dollar technology company by being impulsive or emotional. She'd built it by being strategic, patient, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. Henry thought she was just his wife, living off his income, attending charity lunches and planning dinner parties. He had no idea that she was the anonymous founder and CEO of Sterling Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. He didn't know that the $900 million deal his company was celebrating tonight, the deal that would triple his personal wealth and secure his reputation as a brilliant businessman, had been contingent on approval from Sterling Innovations' mysterious CEO. That approval was supposed to come from her. Past tense. Natasha cleaned her face with damp paper towels and examined the wine stains on her dress. The green silk was ruined, but she didn't care. She'd never wear it again anyway. She'd never attend another one of these suffocating galas, never smile politely while Henry's colleagues made condescending small talk, never pretend to be less than she was. She thought back to how this night had started just 4 hours earlier. She'd been in their bedroom applying the last touches of makeup, when Henry walked in already wearing his tuxedo. "We need to leave in 10 minutes, he'd said without looking at her. "Try not to say anything stupid tonight. The Investors' Council will be there, and I can't have you making me look bad." "I'll do my best," she'd replied, her tone neutral. She'd learned years ago that arguing with Henry only made things worse. At the gala, she tried to stay in the background as usual. But then Rebecca had made a snide comment about wives who contributed nothing to their husband's success. And Natasha, tired of being invisible, had quietly mentioned that many successful men actually succeeded because of their partner's unseen support. Henry had overheard. His face had turned red. He'd grabbed a glass of wine from a passing waiter, and before Natasha could process what was happening, he'd thrown it directly at her face in front of everyone. Now, standing in the bathroom 30 minutes later, Natasha felt oddly calm. The humiliation had burned away any remaining emotional attachment she had to Henry. What was left was pure determination. She pulled out her phone again and called her lawyer. "It's done," she said when he answered. "File the papers first thing Monday morning. And make sure the prenuptial agreement is enforced to the letter." "Are you sure about the timing?" her lawyer asked. "With the Sterling Innovations deal falling through, his assets might take a hit. We could wait." "No. We move forward now. Let him deal with the consequences of his own actions." "Understood. I'll have everything ready." Natasha ended the call and took one last look at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were dry. Her expression was composed. The woman looking back at her was someone new, someone who was done hiding and done accepting less than she deserved. She walked out of the bathroom and straight through the ballroom without looking at anyone. Henry called her name, but she didn't stop. She collected her coat from the check room and stepped outside into the cool night air. Her driver was already waiting, having been alerted by her earlier text. He opened the door without comment, having worked for her long enough to know when silence was required. As the car pulled away from the hotel, Natasha allowed herself one small smile. Henry's empire was built on sand, propped up by anonymous investments and business deals he thought he'd secured through his own brilliance. By Monday morning, he'd start to realize that almost everything he had was actually connected to her in ways he'd never suspected. The revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be systematic, legal, and absolutely devastating. And the best part was that Henry would never fully understand how completely he'd destroyed himself the moment he decided to humiliate her in public. Natasha opened her laptop and began reviewing the documents her team had prepared. There was work to do, and for the first time in 7 years she could do it without pretending to be someone smaller than she was. The real Natasha Warren was about to step into the light. And the business world had no idea what was coming. Natasha's penthouse apartment sat on the 42nd floor of the newest luxury building downtown, purchased under her company's name 6 months ago. Henry didn't know it existed. As far as he knew, they only owned their suburban mansion and the vacation house in the mountains. She dropped her wine-stained coat on the entryway table and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below her, millions of lights marking lives she'd never touch, stories she'd never know. Somewhere out there, Henry was probably still at the gala, making excuses for her absence, spinning the incident into something that made him look better. Let him talk. By Monday, nothing he said would matter. Natasha changed into comfortable clothes and made herself tea, then settled into her home office. 3 computer monitors glowed to life at her touch. The middle screen showed Sterling Innovations' current stock price and real-time business metrics. The left monitor displayed encrypted communications with her executive team. The right held the personal files she'd been compiling for months. Every business dealing Henry had, every investment, every asset, and exactly where her money intersected with his success. The trail was intricate because she'd designed it that way. Sterling Innovations officially appeared in corporate filings as owned by a trust controlled by her longtime friend and lawyer, Thomas Brighton. On paper, Thomas was the CEO and majority shareholder. In reality, he was Natasha's proxy, handling public appearances and signing documents while she made every major decision from behind the curtain. It had started 9 years ago, before she'd even met Henry. Fresh out of MIT with a computer science degree and 3 promising patents, Natasha had tried to pitch her ideas to venture capitalists. She'd walked into 27 meetings with detailed business plans and revolutionary technology concepts. 26 had dismissed her outright. The 27th had offered funding on the condition that she bring on a male co-founder to be the public face of the company. She'd walked away from all of them and built Sterling Innovations from her bedroom with $15,000 of savings and pure determination. She'd filed the patents under a business entity. She'd used Thomas as the figurehead. And she'd poured every ounce of her genius into creating technology that nobody could ignore. The first breakthrough had come within 18 months when Sterling Innovations developed a revolutionary data encryption algorithm. Tech companies fought over the licensing rights. Money started flowing in, and Natasha plowed every dollar back into research and development. She'd met Henry 2 years into building her company. He'd been charming then, ambitious but not cruel, working long hours at an investment firm and dreaming of starting his own venture capital company. Natasha had been drawn to his drive, his confidence, and the way he'd listened when she talked about technology even though he didn't fully understand it. She hadn't told him about Sterling Innovations. Not out of deception but because it felt separate from their relationship. Her company was her private world, the place where she could be fully herself without judgment or limitation. Henry was her attempt at having a normal personal life, a balance to the intense focus she brought to her work. They'd married after a year of dating. For the first 2 years of marriage things had been good. Henry worked his way up to partner at his firm. Natasha continued to build Sterling Innovations in secret, taking meetings under her pseudonym and managing everything remotely. She played the role of supportive wife at Henry's work events while running board meetings via encrypted video calls from their home office. The problem started when Henry's career really took off. He raised his first major fund and started making deals that brought him recognition in financial circles. Success changed him. He started talking about Natasha differently, introducing her as just my wife, instead of by her name. He dismissed her opinions and stopped asking about her day. When she tried to talk about technology or business, he'd pat her hand and change the subject as if she couldn't possibly understand such complex matters. Natasha had watched it happen with a mixture of sadness and growing anger. She'd considered telling him the truth, revealing that she probably understood business better than he did. But something held her back. She started to wonder what Henry really valued about their marriage, and she didn't like the answer that emerged. Then, 6 months ago, she'd seen Henry having dinner with Rebecca at an expensive restaurant across town. She'd been there meeting with a potential acquisition target, dining in a private room under her business identity. She'd glanced out into the main dining area and seen them. Henry leaning close, Rebecca laughing, their body language unmistakably intimate. Natasha had finished her business dinner, returned home, and started planning her exit with the same methodical precision she brought to every business strategy. She'd hired a private investigator to document the affair. She'd reviewed their prenuptial agreement, which she'd insisted on before marriage despite Henry's protests. The document protected her premarital assets and any business interests she held independently. Henry had signed it believing she had nothing of value, viewing it as a romantic gesture to prove he loved her for herself and not her money. The irony was almost funny. Natasha had also started tracing exactly how her anonymous investments had supported Henry's ventures. 3 years ago, when Henry had struggled to close his second fund, Sterling Innovations had invested $20 million through a shell company. Last year, when one of Henry's portfolio companies needed emergency capital, Sterling Innovations had provided it through another intermediary. The $900 million deal Henry was celebrating tonight was between his firm and a consortium of investors led by Sterling Innovations. Henry thought his success was entirely his own. In reality, Natasha had been quietly ensuring he didn't fail, not because she wanted to control him but because at the time, she'd still loved him and wanted him to succeed. She'd thought supporting his dreams while pursuing her own was what partners did. Now she realized she'd been protecting him from the consequences of his own mediocrity. The evidence on her right monitor told the story clearly. Without her anonymous support, Henry's firm would have collapsed twice, and his current net worth was inflated by deals that existed only because of her involvement. The prenuptial agreement meant that when they divorced, he'd keep his assets but lose her silent backing. And once Sterling Innovations withdrew from the current deal and liquidated its other positions in his investments, the house of cards would topple. Natasha opened a secure communication channel with Thomas. "Everything is in motion," his message appeared on her screen. "The Sterling Innovations board has been notified that you're pulling out of the Caldwell Capital deal. They're drafting the official withdrawal letter now. Should be delivered Monday morning." "Good. What about the other investments?" "Already working on it. We can liquidate most positions within 72 hours without triggering any clauses. A few will take longer, but will be completely divested within 2 weeks. And the press release about my identity? Ready to go on your signal. I've scheduled meetings with Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and TechCrunch for next Wednesday. They're very interested in the story of Sterling Innovations' mysterious founder finally going public." Natasha smiled. The business media had been speculating about Sterling Innovations' anonymous CEO for years. The company's success and secretive leadership had created endless fascination. Tech blogs ran regular articles trying to guess who was really in charge. Some thought it was Thomas. Others believed it was a consortium of international investors. A few had guessed it might be a woman, but they'd never connected it to Henry Caldwell's quiet, unambitious wife. The revelation would be huge news. And it would happen just as Henry's professional world was collapsing around him. "Perfect. Let's move forward with everything." "Natasha," Thomas's next message appeared after a pause. "Are you absolutely sure about this? Once we go public with your identity, there's no going back to anonymity. Your life will change completely. She thought about the question. For 9 years, she'd hidden her success, minimized her brilliance, and pretended to be less than she was. She'd done it partly out of necessity in a world that didn't take women in tech seriously. But she'd also done it because some part of her had wanted a normal life, a regular marriage, a separation between her public and private selves. That version of normal had cost her too much. It had cost her authenticity, respect, and ultimately a marriage that was built on lies even though she'd never said anything untrue. Henry had married an image, not a real person. And she'd let him, hoping that somehow love would be enough. I'm sure, she typed back. I'm done hiding. Then let's show the world what you've built. And let Henry Caldwell learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Natasha closed the laptop and walked back to the windows. Tomorrow was Sunday. She'd spend it reviewing the transition plans and preparing for her new public life. Monday, the legal papers would be filed and the business deals would start falling apart. By the end of next week, everyone would know the truth. She thought about the moment at the gala when wine had dripped down her face while 200 people watched. The memory still stung, but the pain was already fading, replaced by something clearer and stronger. Henry had wanted to humiliate her, to put her in her place, to remind her that she was nothing without him. Instead, he'd freed her from any obligation to protect him from the consequences of his own arrogance. Natasha raised her teacup in a silent toast to her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her was done being invisible. Done being diminished. Done pretending that small was safe. The real Natasha Warren was about to change everything. And she couldn't wait to begin. Sunday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Natasha woke early in her new penthouse, made coffee, and sat down to review the files her private investigator had compiled about Henry's affair with Rebecca Lang. The investigator, a former FBI agent named Patricia Chin, had been thorough. The file contained dates, locations, hotel receipts, and photographs. Lots of photographs. Henry and Rebecca having dinner at romantic restaurants. Henry and Rebecca entering hotels together in the middle of the afternoon. Henry and Rebecca walking through a park with their hands linked. What struck Natasha most wasn't the evidence of infidelity itself but how careless they'd been. They'd made no real effort to hide their relationship. It was as if Henry didn't think Natasha was smart enough to notice or important enough to care. Rebecca was 28, 7 years younger than Natasha. She'd started as Henry's assistant 2 years ago, fresh out of business school with impressive credentials and obvious ambition. Natasha had met her several times at company events. Rebecca had always been polite to her face while somehow managing to make Natasha feel insignificant with subtle condescension. According to Patricia's notes, the affair had started about 18 months ago, shortly after Rebecca joined Henry's firm. It had begun with late work nights and business trips, then evolved into regular hotel meetings and weekend getaways when Henry claimed to be at conferences. Natasha remembered those weekends. She'd been relieved to have the house to herself, using the time to focus on sterling innovations without interruption. While Henry was with Rebecca, Natasha had been closing multi-million-dollar deals and expanding her company's technology portfolio. The irony wasn't lost on her. The file included text message excerpts recovered from Henry's cloud backup. Natasha read through them with clinical detachment. She's so clueless. I don't think she suspects anything, Henry had written 3 months ago. Does she ever ask where you are? Rebecca had replied. She never asks about anything important. That's the problem with marrying someone who doesn't understand your world. When are you going to tell her? Soon. I'm just waiting for the right time. Once the Sterling Innovations deal closes, I'll have enough financial security to make a clean break. Natasha almost laughed at that message. Henry was planning to divorce her once he secured a deal that would never have existed without her. He thought he'd be leaving her with a divorce settlement while he went off with his younger girlfriend to enjoy his success. He had no idea that the settlement would be minimal thanks to the prenuptial agreement, or that his success was about to evaporate. The most recent messages were from yesterday, sent during the gala. Did you see her face? Rebecca had written. I almost felt sorry for her. Don't, Henry replied. She needed to understand her place. I'm tired of pretending she's my equal in these settings. You're so bold. That's what I love about you. After tonight, everyone knows the truth. She's just the wife. Nothing more. Natasha set down her coffee cup carefully, afraid she might throw it if she kept holding it. The casual cruelty of those messages was worse than the affair itself. Henry hadn't just stopped loving her. He'd grown to despise her, to see her as an embarrassment, while simultaneously benefiting from her invisible support. She wondered if Rebecca knew about the prenuptial agreement. Probably not. Henry had likely painted himself as a wealthy, successful man who was trapped in a marriage to a simple woman who didn't appreciate him. Rebecca probably imagined stepping into Natasha's life, living in the mansion, attending the galas as Henry's official partner instead of his assistant. That future wasn't going to happen. By the time Natasha was done, there would be no mansion to live in and no galas to attend. Henry's reputation would be in ruins, his business would be struggling, and Rebecca would have to decide if she really loved him or just loved what she thought he represented. Natasha's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw Thomas Brighton's name. "Morning," she answered. "Have you seen the news?" Thomas asked, his voice tight. "What news?" "Check the social media accounts. Someone posted video from last night's gala." Natasha's stomach dropped. She opened her laptop and searched for her name. The video appeared immediately, posted by multiple accounts and already going viral. 30 seconds of footage showing Henry throwing wine in her face, his cruel words clear in the audio, her dignified exit from the ballroom. The comments section was exploding. Some people defended Henry, claiming there must be more to the story. But far more comments expressed outrage at his public humiliation of his wife. Several identified Henry and his company. A few had already connected him to Rebecca, posting speculation about an affair. "This is actually helpful," Natasha said slowly. "Public opinion is already turning against him." "That's true, but it also means you'll be recognized when you go public with sterling innovations. Everyone will connect you to this incident." "Good. Let them see the whole picture." The woman Henry humiliated in public is the same woman who built a multi-billion-dollar company. That contrast will make the story even more powerful. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You've really thought this through." "I've had months to plan. And Henry just made it so much easier by showing the world exactly who he is." After ending the call with Thomas, Natasha spent the rest of the morning reading comments and watching the video spread across the internet. By noon, it had been picked up by several gossip blogs and social media news accounts. By evening, a few business publications were running stories about Henry Caldwell, asking questions about his judgment and character. Natasha's phone buzzed with text messages from friends and acquaintances who'd seen the video. Most expressed concern and offered support. A few asked if she was okay. None knew the full story or what was coming next. The only message that mattered came from Patricia, her private investigator. "Your husband just checked into the Riverside Hotel with Rebecca Lang. Room 847. Thought you'd want to know." Natasha deleted the message. She didn't care where Henry was or what he was doing anymore. Let him enjoy his weekend with Rebecca. It would be one of their last pleasant moments together. She opened a blank document on her laptop and began writing talking points for her upcoming media interviews. She would need to tell her story carefully, threading the line between revealing enough to be compelling while maintaining her dignity and focusing on her business achievements rather than her failed marriage. The narrative was clear. Brilliant woman builds tech empire while hiding her identity to avoid gender bias. Plays supportive wife while her husband's career flourishes with her silent backing. Gets publicly humiliated when he forgets that success often comes from unexpected places. Steps into the light and claims her rightful place in the business world. It was a story about ambition, betrayal, and justice. The media would love it. And more importantly, it was true. As the sun set over the city, Natasha felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow, the machinery she'd set in motion would start producing visible results. Tomorrow, Henry would receive the first signs that his world was changing. Tomorrow, everything would begin to fall apart for him while finally coming together for her. She had loved him once. That was the hardest part to reconcile. The man she'd married had been different, or maybe she'd just seen what she wanted to see. Either way, that man was gone, replaced by someone who valued status over substance and appearance over authenticity. Natasha wasn't sad about losing Henry anymore. She was sad about the years she'd wasted pretending to be smaller than she was. But that sadness was fading too, replaced by anticipation for what came next. She changed into her running clothes and went down to the building's private gym. For an hour, she ran on the treadmill, pushing herself hard, sweating out the last remnants of doubt and hesitation. When she finished, she felt clean and ready. The old Natasha Warren, the one who'd attended galas and smiled politely and never contradicted her husband, was gone. The wine Henry had thrown in her face had washed away the last of that person. What emerged was someone stronger, someone who'd built an empire in secret and was ready to rule it in public. Someone who'd been underestimated for the last time. Tomorrow the real work began. And Natasha couldn't wait. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and sharp autumn air. Natasha woke at 5:30, went for a run along the river path near her building, and returned to shower and dress in a tailored navy blue suit. She chose simple jewelry and styled her hair in a professional twist. The woman in the mirror looked like the CEO she was, not the diminished wife she'd been pretending to be. At 7 o'clock, she called Thomas from her home office. "Are we ready?" she asked. "Everything is in position. The withdrawal letter from Sterling Innovations will be delivered to Caldwell Capital at 9 o'clock. Your divorce papers will be filed at 10. By noon, we'll have liquidated the first round of investments." "And Henry has no idea any of this is coming?" "None. As far as he knows, you're at home, possibly still recovering from the humiliation at the gala. He certainly doesn't expect his business world to implode on a Monday morning." Natasha smiled. "Then let's begin." She hung up and pulled up the live feed of Sterling Innovations stock price on her monitor. The company wasn't publicly traded, but she tracked its valuation through private market indicators. Over the next few hours, that number would shift as word spread about major changes in their investment portfolio. At 8:45 her phone rang. Patricia Chin, the private investigator. "Your husband just arrived at his office," Patricia reported. Rebecca Lang arrived separately 10 minutes earlier. "They're trying to be discreet, but several employees definitely noticed the timing. Keep monitoring. I want to know how he reacts when the news hits." "Will do." At exactly 9 o'clock, Natasha's primary monitor showed a notification from Thomas. "Letter delivered. Confirmed receipt by Henry Caldwell personally." Natasha imagined the scene. Henry opening an official envelope from Sterling Innovations, expecting routine correspondence about the $900 million deal that was supposed to make him incredibly wealthy and cement his reputation as a top-tier venture capitalist. Instead, finding a formal withdrawal letter citing strategic misalignment and terminating all pending agreements. She didn't have to imagine for long. At 9:08 her phone rang. Henry's name appeared on the screen. She let it ring through to voicemail. He called again immediately. She ignored it again. The third time, she answered with a neutral tone. "Yes." "What is happening?" Henry's voice was strained, higher pitched than usual. "I just got a letter from Sterling Innovations withdrawing from our deal. This makes no sense. We had everything finalized. The contracts were ready to sign this week." "I'm sorry to hear that," Natasha said calmly. "Business decisions can be unpredictable." "Sorry? That's all you have to say? This deal was worth $900 million, Natasha. This is serious. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're very talented at what you do." The words came out flat, empty of any real conviction. "I don't have time for your passive-aggressive tone right now. Did you hear anything at the gala? Did someone say something to you about Sterling Innovations?" Natasha almost laughed. Even now, facing disaster, Henry assumed she was too insignificant to have any real information. He thought she might have overheard gossip, not that she could be the source of his problems. "I left early, remember? You made sure everyone saw me leave." Henry was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted from panic to anger. "That was your own fault. You embarrassed me with your comments to Rebecca. You don't understand these environments or how to conduct yourself properly. Is there anything else you needed, Henry? I have things to do today." "Things to do? What could you possibly have to do that's more important than this conversation?" "Actually, quite a lot. In fact, you should check your email. You'll be receiving some documents shortly." "What documents? What are you talking about?" "Divorce papers. I'm filing this morning. Your lawyer should have them within the hour." The silence on the other end lasted so long that Natasha checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Divorce?" Henry finally said. "You're joking." "I'm completely serious. I think Saturday night made it clear that our marriage is over. You were right about one thing. I don't belong in your circle. So I'm leaving it." "You can't be serious. You're upset about the wine incident, I understand, but you're overreacting. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out. I've made my decision. The papers will spell out the settlement terms based on our prenuptial agreement." "That prenup was just a formality. You don't actually expect me to honor those ridiculous terms. I expect you to honor the legal contract you signed. But we can let the lawyers handle the details. I have to go now." "Natasha, wait. Don't do this. Not today, not when I'm dealing with this Sterling Innovation situation. Can we at least talk in person?" "No. All future communication should go through my attorney, Thomas Brighton. You'll have his contact information with the papers." "Thomas Brighton? Your friend who works in tech?" He's not even a divorce lawyer. He's representing me in this matter. Goodbye, Henry. She ended the call and immediately blocked his number. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear or sadness. From adrenaline and the satisfaction of finally speaking the truth out loud. The divorce papers would arrive at Henry's office soon. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad. They'd kept their finances largely separate during the marriage at Natasha's insistence. Henry would keep his assets, but he'd get almost nothing from her. More importantly, once the divorce was public, any remaining anonymous support she'd provided through shell companies would disappear. At 10:15, Thomas sent another message, papers filed. Public record as of 10 minutes ago. Also, we've started liquidating positions. First round complete. Henry's firm just lost $12 million in backing on the Morrison Tech deal. Natasha replied, "What's the fallout?" According to our sources inside Caldwell Capital, Henry is locked in his office making frantic calls. Rebecca Lang tried to go in, but he shouted at her to leave him alone. The office atmosphere is tense. Good. What about the other investors in his deals? Getting nervous. Word travels fast in these circles. When Sterling Innovations pulls out, other investors start asking questions. We're hearing that at least 2 other backers are requesting emergency meetings to review the terms of their involvement. This was exactly what Natasha had anticipated. Venture capital and private equity functioned on relationships and confidence. Once doubt crept in, it spread like poison. Henry's deals weren't actually bad investments, but they weren't as solid as he'd presented them. Without her anonymous support, they'd start to look shaky. And once they looked shaky, other investors would flee. Over the next 2 hours, Natasha monitored the cascading effects of her decisions. Sterling Innovations withdrew from 3 more deals involving Caldwell Capital. 2 anonymous investment funds that she controlled through intermediaries sent formal letters requesting detailed reviews of their positions. A tech blog published a story about Sterling Innovations' sudden strategic shift away from traditional venture capital partnerships. By noon, business journalists were calling Thomas asking about Sterling Innovations' leadership and whether the company was changing direction. Thomas stuck to the script. The company was realigning its investment strategy and would have more to announce soon. Patricia called with an update. Your husband left his office at 11:45. He looked terrible. He drove to the house. He's been there for about 20 minutes, probably looking for you. Let me know when he leaves. Natasha allowed herself a brief lunch break, eating a salad while reviewing the legal documents Thomas had sent over. The divorce filing was straightforward. Based on the prenuptial agreement, Henry would keep his business interests and any assets he'd acquired before or during the marriage. Natasha would keep hers, which officially meant nothing since Henry didn't know she had any. The house was jointly owned. They'd split the equity. The vacation property would be sold and proceeds divided. It was all very clean and very final. At 1:30, Patricia called again. He's leaving the house now. Looks agitated. He's heading back toward downtown. 20 minutes later, Natasha's building concierge called. Mrs. Caldwell, your husband is in the lobby requesting to come up. Should I allow him access? No. Tell him I'm not available and that he needs to contact my attorney for any communication. Understood. 10 minutes after that, Henry sent a barrage of text messages. Natasha read them dispassionately. Please talk to me. This is insane. You're destroying everything over one stupid incident. I know I messed up Saturday, but we can fix this. At least tell me why you're doing this now. Is there someone else? Is that what this is about? The Sterling Innovation situation is killing me. I need you to understand what's at stake. Why won't you answer? Why are you being so cold? The messages continued for another hour, cycling through anger, pleading, and confusion. Natasha deleted them without responding. There was nothing left to say to Henry. He'd shown her exactly what he thought of her, and she'd responded accordingly. By 5 o'clock, the business impact of her moves was becoming clear. Sterling Innovations had effectively extracted itself from every deal involving Caldwell Capital. The financial press was starting to notice and speculate about what it meant. Henry's firm had lost nearly $40 million in committed backing in a single day. Thomas called her directly. It's working. Henry's emergency board meeting this afternoon was apparently brutal. His partners are demanding explanations he can't give. They want to know why Sterling Innovations suddenly pulled out and whether Henry did something to damage the relationship. Let them wonder. What about the media strategy? Still on track for Wednesday. Forbes will run the first interview. We'll time it for maximum impact, right as Henry's professional troubles are becoming public knowledge. Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. For everything. You're doing the hard part. I'm just helping you be seen. The world should have known about you years ago. After the call, Natasha stood at her windows watching the city lights come on as dusk fell. One day down. The machinery was in motion. By this time next week, nothing would look the same. Henry had thrown wine in her face thinking she was powerless. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been about everything. By Tuesday morning, Henry's world was visibly cracking. Natasha tracked the developments through multiple channels. Patricia's surveillance reports, Thomas's business intelligence, and her own monitoring of financial news sites. The Wall Street Journal ran a small piece about Sterling Innovation's sudden withdrawal from several high-profile deals. The article mentioned Caldwell Capital by name and noted that industry insiders were surprised by the timing. The piece was only 4 paragraphs, but it was enough to signal to other investors that something unusual was happening. Patricia's morning report was more detailed. Subject arrived at office at 7:15 looking disheveled. Unusual for him. Coffee stains on his shirt. Multiple partners and associates have been seen entering and leaving his office. Atmosphere at Caldwell Capital appears tense. Rebecca Lang attempted to speak with him twice but was turned away both times. Natasha felt no sympathy. Henry had spent years making her feel small and insignificant. Now he was experiencing what it felt like when the foundation beneath you suddenly disappeared. At 9:30, Thomas called with news. 2 more investors have pulled out of Henry's deals. The ripple effect is starting. Once a few investors get nervous, others follow. It's basic herd mentality. How bad is it for him? Difficult to quantify exactly, but I'd estimate he's lost around $70 million in committed capital across his portfolio in less than 48 hours. His firm manages about $600 million total. If this continues, he's looking at a potential collapse of multiple deals and significant reputation damage. And none of this can be traced back to me? Not directly. Sterling Innovations is making legitimate business decisions to reallocate capital. The shell companies we used for other investments are unwinding their positions for documented strategic reasons. Everything is legal and defensible. Henry has no grounds for any complaint beyond general bad luck. Except it wasn't luck. It was consequence. But Henry would never be able to prove that. That afternoon, Natasha received an unexpected call from Henry's business partner, Richard Sterling, no relation to her company despite the shared name. "Mrs. Caldwell," Richard said formally. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to reach out personally about the situation with Henry. I understand you two are going through some personal difficulties, and I want you to know that won't affect our professional respect for you." Natasha almost laughed at the careful phrasing. Richard had no idea who she really was. He was calling because he probably hoped she had some influence with Henry or might know something about the Sterling Innovation situation. "That's kind of you to say, Richard. But I'm not sure why you're calling me about professional matters." "Well, I thought you might have insights into Henry's state of mind right now. He's been distracted and seems to be handling the Sterling Innovations withdrawal poorly. The firm needs him focused." "I'm afraid I can't help you. Henry and I are in the process of divorcing. I'm not involved in his business affairs." "I see. That's unfortunate timing." Richard paused. "May I ask, do you have any connection to Sterling Innovations? Henry mentioned you might have overheard something at the gala on Saturday." "No connection at all. I left early that evening, as I'm sure you heard." "Right. The incident. Very unfortunate. Between you and me, several of us thought Henry's behavior was inappropriate. We've spoken to him about maintaining better judgment. Too little too late." But Natasha appreciated the information. Henry's own partners were losing confidence in him. "I appreciate the call, Richard. But you should direct any questions to Henry directly. I can't help with his business problems." After ending the call, Natasha made note of the conversation. Henry's partners were worried enough to reach out to her, which meant they were truly desperate for answers. Good. Wednesday morning arrived with rain and wind. Natasha dressed carefully in a burgundy dress with a professional cut. Today was the day she stepped into the light. The Forbes interview was scheduled for 10 o'clock at their downtown offices. Natasha arrived 15 minutes early and was greeted by the journalist, Amanda Richardson, a respected technology reporter who'd been covering the industry for 20 years. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview," Amanda said as they settled into a private conference room. "I have to admit, we've been trying to identify Sterling Innovations' real leadership for years. When your attorney reached out with this exclusive, we jumped at it." "I'm ready to tell my story," Natasha said. "All of it." For the next 2 hours, Natasha spoke about building Sterling Innovations from nothing, developing breakthrough technologies, and choosing to remain anonymous to avoid gender bias in the tech industry. She discussed the challenges of being a woman in technology and the strategic decision to use a male proxy as CEO. Then she talked about her marriage. Not in great detail, but enough to paint the picture. Supportive wife watching her husband's career flourish while hiding her own accomplishments. Public humiliation at a gala. The decision to finally step into the light. So the timing of your revelation, Amanda said carefully, it's connected to your husband's behavior? The timing is connected to my realization that hiding who I am was costing me too much. I built something extraordinary and I'm proud of it. I shouldn't have to pretend otherwise for anyone. Your husband, Henry Caldwell, runs Caldwell Capital. Were you aware that Sterling Innovations just withdrew from a major deal with his firm? I'm aware. That was a business decision based on strategic realignment. Sterling Innovations is shifting focus toward direct technology development rather than venture capital partnerships. Some might see the timing as suspicious. Your husband publicly humiliates you on Saturday. By Monday, his biggest deal falls apart. Business decisions are based on business factors. I understand why people might look for connections, but Sterling Innovations has been evaluating our investment strategy for months. The timeline is coincidental. It was a careful answer. Not a lie, but not the complete truth either. Let people speculate. The facts would speak for themselves. The interview continued, covering Natasha's vision for Sterling Innovations' future, her thoughts on women in technology, and her advice for other entrepreneurs who felt pressured to hide their achievements. When it ended, Amanda smiled. This is going to be a huge story. Thank you for trusting us with it. Thank you for listening. The Forbes article would publish online that evening and hit print editions on Friday. Thomas had coordinated similar interviews with 2 other major publications to run throughout the week, building momentum. Natasha returned to her penthouse feeling energized. She'd spent 9 years hiding. Those 2 hours of honest conversation had felt like breathing fresh air for the first time. At 6 o'clock, the Forbes article went live. The headline read, "The Anonymous Billionaire. Meet Natasha Warren, the woman behind Sterling Innovations." The article was comprehensive and well-written, including sidebar pieces about Sterling Innovations' technological achievements and the broader issue of gender bias in the tech industry. But the detail that immediately caught fire on social media was the connection to Henry Caldwell. Warren's decision to go public comes days after a viral video showed her husband, venture capitalist Henry Caldwell, throwing wine at her during a charity gala and calling her unworthy of his elite circle. Warren declines to directly connect her revelation to that incident but acknowledges that hiding her success for the sake of others has become untenable. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Tech blogs picked it up. Business news sites ran with it. Social media exploded with commentary. The video from Saturday's gala was shared again, now with new context. The woman Henry had humiliated wasn't just his wife. She was a self-made billionaire who'd secretly built one of the most innovative tech companies in the country. The narrative was perfect and it wasn't manufactured. It was simply the truth finally told. By 8 o'clock, Natasha's phone was flooded with calls and messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Former classmates from MIT. Business contacts. Friends who'd drifted away during her marriage. All of them wanted to congratulate her, express shock, or simply talk. She responded to a few selectively, ignoring most. There would be time for reconnection later. Right now, she needed to focus on the next steps. Patricia called with an update. Your husband saw the article. He's been locked in his home office for 2 hours. Rebecca Lang stopped by the house earlier but left after 30 minutes. She looked upset. Keep monitoring, but I think we can scale back surveillance soon. The public record will tell most of the story from here. That night, Natasha slept peacefully for the first time in months. The secret she'd carried for 9 years was finally out. The revenge she'd planned so carefully was unfolding perfectly. And the life she'd always wanted but never claimed was finally within reach. Henry's world was falling apart. Hers was just beginning to take shape. Thursday morning brought unexpected freedom. Natasha woke without the weight of secrets pressing down on her chest. The Forbes article had been live for less than 24 hours, but the response was overwhelming. Her inbox contained hundreds of messages. Interview requests from major media outlets. Speaking invitations from technology conferences. Messages of support from women in business. Even a few notes from venture capitalists who dismissed her years ago, now pretending they'd always believed in her potential. She ignored the venture capitalists and focused on the opportunities that actually interested her. TechCrunch wanted a follow-up interview focusing on her technology innovations. Harvard Business School invited her to give a keynote address. 3 major tech companies expressed interest in licensing Sterling Innovations patents. Thomas called at 8:30. Have you seen the stock market response? No, I've been avoiding screens this morning. Sterling Innovations' private valuation jumped 12% overnight. The mystery was apparently holding us back. Now that investors know you're real and your story is out, confidence in the company has increased significantly. Interesting. I thought anonymity was protecting us. It was until it wasn't. You made the right call going public. The timing was perfect. What about Henry? That's the other reason I'm calling. Caldwell Capital is in serious trouble. 3 more investors pulled out yesterday after the Forbes article. His partners are calling emergency meetings. There's talk of removing him from leadership. Natasha absorbed this information. She'd known Henry would face consequences, but hearing the reality of it still felt strange. This was the man she'd loved once, now watching his career dissolve. How is he handling it? Not well, according to our sources. He's been trying to do damage control, but he can't explain why Sterling Innovations withdrew without revealing that his wife, the woman he publicly humiliated, is actually the CEO. And that revelation makes him look either foolish or malicious. Both, probably. There's one more thing. Rebecca Lang resigned from Caldwell Capital yesterday evening. Apparently, she and Henry had a significant argument in his office. Staff heard shouting. Natasha felt a grim satisfaction. Rebecca had wanted Henry's success and status. Now that both were crumbling, she was jumping ship. It was predictable and somehow fitting. Keep me updated, but I'm shifting focus now. The revenge part is done. I need to concentrate on building Sterling Innovations' public presence and my own future. Understood. For what it's worth, Natasha, watching you handle this has been impressive. You could have destroyed Henry loudly and publicly. Instead, you just removed your support and let consequences do the work. That's the thing about building on someone else's foundation. When the foundation moves, everything collapses. Henry built his success on my invisible support. Once I withdrew it, nature took its course. After the call, Natasha spent the morning responding to the most important messages in her inbox. She accepted the Harvard speaking invitation. She agreed to the TechCrunch interview. She set up preliminary meetings with the tech companies interested in licensing deals. At 11, her doorbell rang. She checked the security camera and saw Thomas standing in the hallway holding a bottle of champagne. We're celebrating, he announced when she opened the door. You did it. You stepped into your own light and the world is better for it. They sat in her living room with glasses of champagne, the city spread out below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. How does it feel? Thomas asked. Being public after all this time. Liberating. Terrifying. Energizing. All at once. Any regrets? Natasha considered the question. About going public? No. About Henry? Sometimes. Not about leaving him, but about the years I spent hiding. I let him make me feel small because I thought love meant accommodation. I was wrong. You were protecting yourself in a world that wasn't fair. That's different from being wrong. Maybe. But I'm done protecting myself by hiding. If the world has a problem with successful women, that's the world's problem, not mine. Thomas raised his glass. To Natasha Warren. Brilliant entrepreneur, technology innovator, and certified legend. They drank and then Thomas pulled out his laptop. Want to see something interesting? Twitter is having a field day with your story. There's already a hashtag. He turned the screen so Natasha could see. The hashtag Natasha Warren was trending. Thousands of posts celebrating her revelation, discussing her technologies and condemning Henry's behavior. Several prominent women in tech had posted messages of support. A few male tech leaders who'd probably dismissed women in the past were carefully praising her achievements. But the most interesting posts were from regular people, especially women, sharing their own stories of hiding their accomplishments or being dismissed by partners who felt threatened by their success. Natasha's story had apparently resonated far beyond the tech industry. You've become a symbol, Thomas said. Not just of success, but of refusing to be diminished. I'm not sure I want to be a symbol. I just want to run my company and live my life. Too late. You're inspiring people. That comes with the territory. Over the next several days, Natasha settled into her new reality. She hired a publicist to manage media requests and a personal assistant to handle her increasingly complex schedule. She did 3 more major interviews, each focusing on different aspects of her story and her technology. She also began reshaping Sterling Innovations' public image. The company had always been known for innovation but not for personality. Now, with Natasha as the visible leader, they could build a brand around values that mattered to her. Authentic excellence, innovation without ego, and creating opportunities for underestimated talent. On Saturday, exactly 1 week after the gala incident, Natasha attended her first public event as herself. A technology conference where she'd been invited to give the keynote address. She wore a red dress that made her feel powerful and confident. No more muted colors or trying to blend in. The conference center was packed with over 1,000 people. As Natasha walked onto the stage, the audience rose in a standing ovation. She stood at the podium, momentarily overwhelmed by the response. When the applause finally quieted, she spoke from the heart. "Thank you. A week ago, most of you didn't know my name. Those who did knew me as someone's wife, not as myself. Today, I stand here as the founder and CEO of Sterling Innovations, and more importantly, as someone who's finally done pretending to be smaller than I am." She talked about building her company in secret, about the challenges women face in technology, and about the cost of hiding your gifts to make others comfortable. She didn't mention Henry by name, but everyone in the room knew the context. Success doesn't require permission, she concluded. It requires work, vision, and the courage to claim what you've built. For too long, I waited for someone to give me permission to be seen. Then I realized that permission could only come from myself. I hope my story encourages others to give themselves that same permission. Don't wait for the world to recognize you. Recognize yourself and the world will follow. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Backstage afterward, dozens of people wanted to shake her hand and share their own stories. Young women who'd felt dismissed. Entrepreneurs who'd hidden their ambitions. People who'd made themselves smaller for partners or families or jobs that didn't appreciate them. Natasha listened to each one, understanding their experiences in a way she couldn't have a week earlier. Her story wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever felt underestimated or invisible. That evening, alone in her penthouse, Natasha reflected on the whirlwind week. The divorce would be finalized in a few months. Her company was thriving. Her calendar was full of exciting opportunities. Henry's career was in shambles, though she'd stopped actively monitoring his situation. That chapter was closed. She pulled up photos from the conference on her laptop. There she was on stage in her red dress, confident and visible, claiming space without apology. The woman in those photos was someone she barely recognized from who she'd been 2 weeks ago. But that wasn't quite right. She'd always been this person. She'd just been hiding. Now the hiding was over and she could finally be whole. Natasha closed the laptop and walked to her windows. The city lights stretched to the horizon, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. Somewhere out there, other people were hiding their gifts, making themselves small, waiting for permission that would never come. She hoped they found their courage. She hoped they gave themselves permission. She hoped they stepped into their light the way she finally had. The revenge against Henry was complete, but more importantly, the reconciliation with herself was just beginning. And that mattered more than any amount of vindication. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable sunshine and temperatures warm enough to open windows. Natasha was reviewing quarterly reports when her building's front desk called. "Ms. Warren, there's a Henry Caldwell in the lobby insisting he needs to speak with you. He says it's urgent." Natasha's first instinct was to refuse, to send him away through her attorney like she'd done for the past 2 weeks. But curiosity won. She wanted to see him, to look into the eyes of the man who'd humiliated her and understand what he thought could possibly be said now. "Send him up. But station security outside my door, please." "Of course." 5 minutes later, her doorbell rang. Natasha checked the security camera before opening the door. Henry stood in the hallway looking nothing like the confident, cruel man from the gala. His suit was wrinkled. His hair needed cutting. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. She opened the door but didn't invite him in. "You have 5 minutes. Please, can we talk inside? I don't want to do this in the hallway." Against her better judgment, Natasha stepped aside. Henry entered her penthouse and looked around with obvious surprise. "When did you get this place?" "6 months ago." "There's a lot you didn't know about me, Henry." "I'm starting to realize that." He turned to face her. "I read the Forbes article. I saw all the other interviews. Sterling Innovations. That's really you?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I founded the company 9 years ago. Before we met." Henry sank onto her couch without being invited, as if his legs wouldn't support him anymore. 9 years. You've been running a multi-billion-dollar tech company for our entire marriage and I never knew. You never asked about my life. You assumed I spent my days shopping and planning dinners. Why didn't you tell me? At first, because I wanted to keep that part of my life separate. Later, because I realized you wouldn't have been able to handle it. Your ego couldn't have tolerated having a wife more successful than you. Henry flinched but didn't argue. Is that why you pulled Sterling Innovations out of our deal? To punish me? I pulled out because it was a bad business decision to invest with someone whose judgment I couldn't trust. Your behavior at the gala demonstrated exactly who you are. Would you invest money with someone who publicly humiliates people when they feel insecure? That was a mistake. I was drunk and stupid and I deeply regret it. But you destroyed my entire career over one bad moment. Natasha walked to the windows, putting distance between them. I didn't destroy your career, Henry. I simply stopped propping it up. Everything you achieved that was real, you can keep. Everything that depended on my invisible support disappeared when I withdrew it. That's the difference between authentic success and borrowed success. What are you talking about? The anonymous investments that saved your second fund 3 years ago? Those came from Sterling Innovations through shell companies. The emergency capital for the Morrison Tech deal last year? Also me. Even the Sterling Innovations partnership itself existed because I approved it, knowing it would benefit you. I spent years supporting your career while you treated me like an accessory. Henry's face went pale. You were behind all of that? Yes, because I loved you and wanted you to succeed. But you became someone who didn't deserve that support. Someone cruel and dismissive and unfaithful. You know about Rebecca. I've known for months. I hired a private investigator. I have documentation of your affair, including text messages where you laughed about how clueless I was. Henry put his head in his hands. This is unbelievable. You've been 3 steps ahead of me the entire time. Not ahead of you. I was just living my life while you underestimated me. There's a difference. My partners are forcing me out of Caldwell Capital. The firm will probably fold within 6 months. My reputation is destroyed. Everyone in the industry knows I publicly humiliated my wife, who turned out to be one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. I'm a joke. That must be difficult for you. Henry looked up, his expression desperate. Please. You've made your point. You've proven that you're brilliant and I was blind. Can we stop this now? Can you make a statement saying the Sterling Innovations withdrawal wasn't connected to our personal issues? Can you help me save something from this disaster? No. No? Just like that? Yes, just like that. Why would I help you, Henry? You poured wine on my face in front of 200 people. You called me unworthy. You had an affair and mocked me for not noticing. You've spent years making me feel insignificant. Now you want mercy? I made mistakes, but we were married for 7 years. That has to count for something. It did count for something. It counted when I supported your career quietly for years. It counted when I forgave smaller slights and dismissive comments. It counted right up until you decided to publicly degrade me. That was the moment our marriage stopped counting for anything. Henry stood and took a step toward her. I'm begging you. I'll do whatever you want. We can stay married, get counseling, start over. Or if you want the divorce, fine, but at least help me professionally. Make one statement. Do one interview where you say nice things about my business acumen. Something. You're not listening. I don't want anything from you and I'm not giving you anything either. We're done completely. The divorce will be finalized next month. After that, I never want to see you again. You're really going to let me lose everything? After 7 years together? You didn't lose everything, Henry. You lost the success you didn't actually earn and the wife you didn't value. What you have left is what you built on your own, which apparently isn't much. How can you be so cold? This isn't the woman I married. The woman you married was hiding. The woman standing in front of you right now is real. And she's done being treated as less than she is. Henry's expression shifted from desperate to angry. You planned all of this, didn't you? The timing of the divorce, the Forbes article, the business withdrawals. You orchestrated my downfall. I orchestrated my emergence. Your downfall was a side effect of removing my support. There's a difference. You're vindictive. You're cruel. This is revenge, pure and simple. Call it whatever you want. I call it consequences. You humiliated me, so I stopped protecting you. That's not revenge. That's basic self-respect. Rebecca was right about you. She said you were secretly bitter and resentful. I defended you, but she was right. Natasha laughed without humor. How's your relationship with Rebecca going, by the way? I heard she resigned from your firm when your career started falling apart. Turns out she was more interested in your success than in you. Sound familiar? Henry's jaw clenched. At least she didn't lie to me for years. I never lied. You never asked. You assumed I was simple and unambitious because that made you feel superior. You saw what you wanted to see. If you were really so successful and brilliant, why did you need to hide it? Why the secrecy? Because women in tech face constant skepticism and dismissal. I built Sterling Innovations anonymously to avoid gender bias and let the work speak for itself. It was a strategic decision that proved correct. But I'm done hiding now, partly because you made me realize the cost of invisibility. So I should thank you for using our marriage as cover for your secret business empire? You should thank me for supporting your career when you did nothing to deserve it. But I don't actually care if you thank me or not. Your gratitude is irrelevant. They stared at each other across her living room. This man had been her husband, her partner, someone she'd loved deeply. Now he was a stranger and not a particularly impressive one. Is there anything I can say that will change your mind? Henry asked finally. No. Can you at least tell me why Sterling Innovations specifically withdrew from our deal? Give me something I can tell my partners. Strategic realignment. We're focusing on direct technology development rather than venture capital partnerships. That's the truth and it's all you need to know. But it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is none of your business. You're not entitled to my reasoning or my plans or anything else about my life. We're getting divorced. We're done. That's the only truth you need. Henry walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped. At the threshold he turned back. I really did love you once, you know. Maybe. But you loved the version of me that made you feel important more than you loved the real me. When those two things stopped aligning, you chose your ego over our marriage. And you chose revenge over forgiveness. I chose self-respect over being disrespected. Call it what you want, but don't expect me to feel guilty. Henry left without another word. Natasha stood by her windows watching the street below until she saw him emerge from the building and get into his car. She felt nothing watching him drive away. No satisfaction, no sadness, no lingering connection. Just relief that the conversation was over and she'd never have to have it again. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Saw Henry enter your building on security footage. Everything okay? She replied, fine. You wanted mercy. I declined. It's done now. Good. You're stronger than I could have been in your position. Natasha didn't feel particularly strong. She felt tired and ready to move forward. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also been exhausting. Facing Henry meant facing the years she'd wasted and the truth about how little he'd valued her. But it was over now. Really over. No more questions, no more chances, no more entanglement. The divorce would finalize. Henry would rebuild whatever he could from the wreckage of his career. And Natasha would continue building the life she'd always deserved. She made herself tea and returned to her quarterly reports. There was work to do, and that work mattered more than any amount of time spent dwelling on the past. The confrontation had given her closure. Henry had proven exactly who he was one final time. And she'd proven to herself that she could face him without flinching, without forgiving, and without regret. That was enough. More than enough. It was freedom. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Henry, Natasha stood backstage at Harvard Business School waiting to deliver the keynote address she'd agreed to months earlier. Her red dress had been replaced with a professional emerald green suit. Her hair was styled simply. She wore minimal jewelry and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer had anything to prove. The introduction was still happening on stage. Natasha could hear the dean listing her achievements. Founder and CEO of Sterling Innovations, multiple patents in data encryption and cloud technology, Forbes list of most influential women in tech, philanthropic work supporting women in STEM fields. It sounded surreal hearing her accomplishments spoken aloud. For 9 years, those achievements had existed in the shadows. Now they were public record, part of her official identity. Please welcome Natasha Warren, the dean concluded. Natasha walked onto the stage to sustained applause. The auditorium was packed with graduate students, faculty, and business leaders. Some faces showed curiosity. Others showed respect. A few showed something that looked like recognition, as if they saw themselves in her story. She took her place at the podium and waited for the applause to fade. Thank you. When I was invited to speak here 6 months ago, I was still anonymous. The world knew Sterling Innovations but didn't know me. In the time since I accepted this invitation, my entire life has changed. I've gone from invisible to very visible, from hidden to exposed, from protected to vulnerable. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Some people have asked if I regret going public. The answer is complicated. I regret that the circumstances that pushed me into visibility involved betrayal and humiliation. But I don't regret the result. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living authentically. That's worth every uncomfortable moment of transition. For the next 40 minutes, Natasha talked about entrepreneurship, innovation, and the specific challenges women face in male-dominated industries. She discussed her decision to remain anonymous and her eventual choice to step into the light. She talked about building sterling innovations from nothing and the importance of owning your success without apology. But she also talked about failure, doubt, and the cost of hiding. I built a successful company, she said near the end of her talk. But I failed at building an authentic life. 4 years, I separated my professional success from my personal identity because I thought that separation would protect me from bias and judgment. What I didn't realize was that the separation was also preventing me from being whole. You can't hide your best self in some areas of life and expect to thrive in others. Eventually, the disconnection catches up with you. She looked out at the audience, seeing young faces full of ambition and older faces marked by experience. My advice to anyone building something important is this: don't hide your excellence to make others comfortable. The world doesn't need smaller versions of talented people. It needs the full expression of every gift, every innovation, every idea. If someone in your life can't handle your success, that's information about them, not a reflection of you. The response was overwhelming. The standing ovation lasted minutes. Afterward, Natasha spent an hour in a private reception answering questions and talking with students and faculty. Several young women approached her with tears in their eyes, sharing stories of hiding their achievements or facing dismissal from partners who felt threatened. One student, a woman in her late 20s pursuing her MBA, pulled Natasha aside. I've been hiding my tech startup from my family because they think I should focus on marriage and children. Your story gave me courage to tell them the truth. Thank you. Natasha hugged her. Your startup and your family aren't mutually exclusive. You can build both if that's what you want. But you can't build anything sustainable on a foundation of hiding. That evening, Natasha returned to her penthouse emotionally drained but satisfied. The speaking engagement had been more impactful than she'd expected. She was beginning to understand that her story resonated not because it was unique but because it was universal. Almost everyone had experienced being underestimated or feeling pressure to hide their gifts. Over the next month, Natasha settled into a new routine. She divided her time between running Sterling Innovations, accepting speaking engagements, and starting a mentorship program for women in technology. The program, funded by Sterling Innovations, provided resources and guidance to female entrepreneurs who faced barriers in raising capital or accessing networks. The divorce from Henry was finalized in a brief court hearing. Natasha didn't attend. Her lawyer handled everything. The settlement was exactly what the prenuptial agreement specified: clean, fair, and final. Henry kept his remaining business interests and the house, which he'd have to sell to pay his debts. Natasha kept everything that was hers, which turned out to be substantially more valuable. She heard through business channels that Henry had left the city, relocating to Austin to attempt a fresh start. Caldwell Capital had indeed folded, with his former partners starting a new firm without him. Rebecca Lang had taken a position at a different investment company on the West Coast. The affair that had seemed so important during their relationship had apparently burned out quickly once the external trappings of success disappeared. Natasha felt no triumph hearing about their struggles. She felt nothing at all. That chapter was closed and she had no interest in looking back. Instead, she focused on building. Sterling Innovations acquired 2 smaller tech companies, expanding their capabilities in artificial intelligence and machine learning. The company's valuation continued to rise as investors responded positively to Natasha's visible leadership. She also began building a personal life that didn't revolve around hiding. She reconnected with friends from MIT who drifted away during her marriage. She started attending technology conferences as herself rather than through proxies. She even went on a few casual dates, though nothing serious developed. She was in no rush to find another relationship. For now, being single and visible was exactly what she needed. One Saturday afternoon, Natasha volunteered at a coding workshop for teenage girls interested in technology. She'd started doing these workshops monthly as part of her mentorship program. The girls were smart, curious, and full of questions. During a break, one girl approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Warren, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you think you would have been as successful if you hadn't hidden for so long? Like, was the hiding necessary?" It was a good question, one Natasha had asked herself often. "I think I would have been successful either way," she answered carefully. But the path would have been different and probably harder. Hiding allowed me to build without interference, but it also cost me the ability to inspire others or build a personal brand around my work. There were trade-offs. I don't regret the choice I made when I made it, but I'm glad I'm living differently now. Did it hurt when your husband didn't know who you really were? Yes, it hurt a lot. But in the end, his ignorance said more about him than about me. He never asked who I was. He just assumed. That's on him, not on me. The girl nodded thoughtfully. I'm going to remember that. Assumptions say more about the person making them. Exactly. Don't ever let someone else's limited imagination become your ceiling. As the workshop continued, Natasha reflected on how much had changed in just 2 months. The humiliation at the gala felt like years ago, not weeks. The woman who'd stood frozen with wine dripping down her face seemed like a different person entirely. That woman had been waiting for permission to matter. This woman knew she mattered whether anyone else recognized it or not. That evening, Natasha hosted a small dinner party at her penthouse. Thomas was there, along with 3 other friends from the tech industry and 2 women from her mentorship program. They ate good food, drank excellent wine that wasn't being thrown at anyone, and talked about technology, innovation, and the future. At one point, Thomas raised his glass to Natasha for building something extraordinary and finally letting the world see it. Everyone drank, and then one of the mentorship program participants added her own toast to second acts and new beginnings, to showing up as ourselves without apology. They drank again, and Natasha felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. This was what community felt like when it was built on truth rather than performance. These people knew her, really knew her, and valued what they knew. After everyone left, Natasha stood at her windows looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Henry was starting over, learning to build on his own foundation instead of borrowed support. Somewhere, Rebecca was discovering that success built on someone else's achievement is hollow. Somewhere, other people were hiding their gifts and waiting for permission to shine. Natasha hoped they found their courage. She hoped they stepped into their light. She hoped they learned what she'd learned, that being seen is scary but being invisible is worse. The divorce was final. The revenge was complete. The secret was out. And Natasha Warren, once invisible, was now standing exactly where she belonged in the full light of her own success. The new beginning wasn't just about business or recognition. It was about integration, about being whole, about no longer dividing herself into acceptable and hidden pieces. She was done hiding. And the world, ready or not, was going to see what she could really do. 4 months after the gala, Natasha sat in her attorney's office reviewing the final settlement documents. Every detail had been negotiated, every asset accounted for, every term agreed upon. This was the last piece of administrative business connecting her to Henry Caldwell. Thomas Brighton sat across from her, his own copy of the documents spread on the desk. "This is it," he said. "Once you sign, the marriage is legally dissolved in every sense. No more entanglements." Natasha picked up the pen. The prenuptial agreement had made this process much simpler than it could have been. Henry's attempt to contest the terms had been rejected by the judge within minutes. The contract was clear and legally sound. Henry kept the house, which he'd already listed for sale. The market had cooled and he'd likely take a loss, but that wasn't Natasha's concern. He kept his remaining stake in what was left of Caldwell Capital, which was essentially worthless since the firm was in liquidation. He kept his car and his personal belongings. Natasha kept everything else, which meant she kept everything that mattered. Her stake in Sterling Innovations, all her patents, her investment portfolio, her properties. The settlement included no alimony in either direction, which made sense since Natasha's income dwarfed anything Henry had earned even at his peak. "Have you heard anything about how he's doing?" Natasha asked as she signed each page. "Not directly. But the business press has covered his situation pretty thoroughly. He's consulting now, working for other firms on contract basis. No longer running his own shop. His reputation never recovered from the combination of the gala video and the revelation about who you really are. That's actually sad. He was talented once, before success corrupted him. Maybe he'll learn from this and rebuild into someone better. Or maybe he won't. Either way, it's no longer your problem." Natasha signed the last page and pushed the documents across the desk. "Done. I'm officially divorced. How does it feel? Like closure. Like freedom. Like the final chapter of a story I'm ready to stop telling." Thomas gathered the papers and placed them in a folder. "The business media is still interested in your story. Have you thought about doing a longer form piece? Maybe something for a book?" "Not yet. Maybe eventually. Right now, I want to focus on moving forward rather than analyzing the past. Fair enough. Though I think there's value in your story beyond personal catharsis. Other women need to hear it. They've heard it. I've given a dozen speeches, done 20 interviews. At some point, the story stops being helpful and starts being repetitive. You're probably right. So what's next? What does post-divorce Natasha Warren want to build? The question made her smile. Everything. I want to expand Sterling Innovations into new markets. I want to grow the mentorship program. I want to invest in other women-founded companies. I want to live loudly and visibly and without apology. That's a good list. And I want to date someone who knows exactly who I am from the start. No hiding, no surprises, no pretending to be less than I am. If that person exists. That person exists. There are plenty of people secure enough to handle dating a brilliant billionaire tech CEO. We'll see. I'm not in a rush. That evening, Natasha celebrated her official divorce by attending a technology conference in San Francisco. She'd been invited to participate in a panel discussion about innovation and entrepreneurship. The other panelists included 2 male tech founders and another woman who ran a successful AI company. During the panel, the moderator asked about the challenges women face in technology. Natasha's fellow female panelist talked about funding difficulties and bias in venture capital. Then the moderator turned to Natasha. Your situation was unique because you built Sterling Innovations while hiding your identity. Do you think that was necessary given the challenges women face in tech? Necessary? No. Strategic? Yes. At the time, I believed anonymity would allow my work to be judged on its merits rather than being filtered through assumptions about women in technology. That belief was probably correct. But it came at a personal cost. I'm not sure I'd make the same choice again, but I understand why I made it then. What would you do differently? I'd be visible from the start. Not because the environment has changed enough to make that easy, but because hiding takes too much energy. I spent 9 years living a divided life, and that division created its own problems. If I were starting over today, I'd rather face bias head-on than pretend it doesn't exist by becoming invisible. One of the male panelists jumped in. But don't you think your success proves that merit wins out eventually? Your company thrived regardless of your gender. Natasha smiled politely, hearing the subtext in his question. My company thrived because I'm exceptional at what I do and because I had enough resources to build without depending on traditional funding sources. Most women don't have those advantages. For every story like mine, there are 100 women with brilliant ideas who can't get funding because investors assume women don't understand technology or business. My success doesn't prove the system works. It proves I succeeded despite the system. The moderator moved on to other topics, but Natasha noticed several women in the audience nodding in agreement with her answer. After the panel, 3 female entrepreneurs approached her to share their own funding struggles. Thank you for saying that, one woman told her. I'm so tired of successful women being held up as proof that sexism doesn't exist in tech. Your success and the barriers are both real. They're not mutually exclusive. Exactly. We can acknowledge both things at once. Flying back to her city that night, Natasha reflected on how many times she'd been asked to prove that gender bias existed in technology. It was an exhausting request. She'd lived it. She'd made strategic decisions to work around it. The evidence was everywhere for anyone willing to look. But she was done trying to convince skeptics. Her energy was better spent supporting other women, building her company and living her life on her own terms. The settlement was finalized. The divorce was complete. The revenge against Henry had run its course. What remained was the actual work of building the future she wanted. Back in her penthouse, Natasha opened her laptop and reviewed Sterling Innovations' quarterly results. The company had grown 15% in the 3 months since she'd gone public. Several major tech companies had approached her about partnerships. 3 university research labs wanted to collaborate on projects. She also had offers to join corporate boards, speak at conferences around the world, and invest in dozens of early-stage companies. Visibility had created opportunity in ways anonymity never could. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, her former private investigator who'd become something of a friend during the divorce process. Saw the panel discussion online. You were great. Coffee next week? Natasha replied, absolutely. Tuesday morning? Perfect. She closed the laptop and walked to her windows, her nightly ritual. The city lights no longer felt isolating. They felt like possibility, like connection, like evidence that millions of people were out there living their lives and pursuing their dreams. Somewhere in that city, maybe someone was watching the panel discussion she just participated in. Maybe a young woman was seeing Natasha's story and thinking about her own hidden dreams. Maybe someone was finding courage to stop making themselves smaller. The settlement documents sitting in Thomas's office represented the legal end of her marriage. But the real ending had happened months ago when wine hit her face and humiliation turned to clarity. This was just paperwork confirming what she'd already known. That chapter was over and she was ready for whatever came next. Natasha raised an imaginary glass to her reflection in the window. To closure. To freedom. To building without hiding. To futures unlimited by other people's limited imaginations. The divorce was final. The woman who emerged from it was just getting started. 6 months after the gala, Natasha stood on stage at the Tech Innovation Awards accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The ceremony was held in the same hotel ballroom where Henry had thrown wine at her, a coincidence that several media outlets had already noted in their coverage of the event. She wore a bright blue dress this time, bold and unapologetic. Her acceptance speech was brief and focused on the future rather than the past. "This award belongs to everyone who's ever been told they don't belong in technology," she said, holding the glass trophy. "To the women who are building extraordinary things in the shadows, I see you. Come into the light. The industry needs you visible, not hidden." The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, journalists swarmed her with questions. How did it feel to be back in this ballroom? Was the timing intentional? What would she say to Henry Caldwell if she could? She answered the first 2 questions politely and declined to answer the third. "I'm not interested in talking about my former marriage. I'm interested in talking about what Sterling Innovations is building and how we're changing the technology landscape." The message was clear. Henry was past, innovation was future. She wouldn't be defined by what happened to her but by what she chose to create. Later that evening, Natasha hosted a celebration at her penthouse with her closest friends and colleagues. Thomas was there, along with Patricia, several members of her executive team, and a dozen women from her mentorship program. 6 months ago, none of this existed, Thomas said, gesturing at the gathering. You were hiding, isolated, trapped in a marriage that diminished you. Look at you now. Natasha looked around the room at the women laughing and talking, sharing ideas and building connections. This is what I wanted without knowing I wanted it. Community built on truth rather than performance. Relationships where I don't have to hide who I am. You've inspired a lot of people, you know. The mentorship program has 500 applicants for 20 spots. Your speaking engagements are booked solid for the next year. Sterling Innovations' valuation has doubled since you went public. The company was always valuable. Visibility just made that value more obvious. One of the younger women from the mentorship program approached them. Ms. Warren, can I ask you something? Please call me Natasha. And yes. Do you ever regret how everything happened? The public humiliation, the way your marriage ended? Would you change it if you could? Natasha considered the question carefully. I regret that Henry became someone cruel. I regret the years I spent hiding. But I don't regret where I ended up. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the most important changes. If Henry hadn't humiliated me publicly, I might have stayed in that marriage for years, slowly diminishing into nothing. He did me a favor by showing me exactly who he was. That's a generous way to look at it. Not generous, just honest. I'm grateful for the clarity, even if the method was brutal. As the evening continued, Natasha found herself reflecting on the 6-month journey from that terrible moment at the gala to this celebration. The path hadn't been easy. Going public had meant facing scrutiny, answering difficult questions, and adjusting to life without anonymity's protection. But it had also meant connection, authenticity, and the ability to build without hiding. She'd found her voice as a speaker and mentor. She'd expanded Sterling Innovations in ways that would have been impossible while she remained anonymous. She'd helped dozens of women entrepreneurs get funding and support. She'd lived loudly and visibly without apology. The revenge against Henry had been satisfying in its precision. He'd lost his company, his reputation, and his marriage because of his own actions. Natasha hadn't destroyed him. She'd simply removed the invisible support he'd never acknowledged, and nature had taken its course. But revenge wasn't what drove her anymore. Building was. Creating was. Making space for other people who'd been told they didn't belong. Around midnight, as the party wound down, Natasha stood at her windows watching the city lights. Thomas joined her with 2 glasses of champagne. To 6 months of living out loud, he said, handing her a glass. To 6 months. And to whatever comes next. They drank and then Thomas asked, any regrets? Anything you'd do differently? I'd have left Henry sooner. I'd have gone public with Sterling Innovations years ago. I'd have stopped hiding the moment I realized hiding was costing me too much. But those are small regrets. Overall, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Have you heard anything about Henry recently? Not much. Last I heard he was doing consulting work in Austin. Living quietly, rebuilding slowly. I hope he learned something from all of this. Do you ever think about reaching out? Making peace. We are at peace. Not the kind where we talk or maintain connection, but the kind where we've both moved on to separate lives. That's enough. And Rebecca? Also living her life somewhere else. I don't think about her much. She wanted Henry's success more than Henry himself. Once that success disappeared, so did she. It's predictable and sad and not my concern. Thomas smiled. You've become remarkably zen about the whole thing. Not zen. Just focused on what matters. The past is done. I can't change it and I don't want to dwell on it. The future is what I can shape. Over the next weeks, Natasha continued building her empire in all its forms. Sterling Innovations launched 3 new products, each incorporating breakthrough technology that had been developed during her years of anonymous innovation. The company announced plans to open research facilities in 4 new cities, creating hundreds of high-tech jobs. The mentorship program expanded to include online components, allowing women from anywhere in the country to participate. Natasha personally met with each cohort, sharing insights and connecting ments with potential investors and partners. She also started dating someone new. A professor of computer science at the local university, someone who understood technology, respected her achievements, and had no interest in competing with her success. It was casual and undefined, but it was honest. He knew exactly who she was from the first conversation, and that transparency felt revolutionary after years of hiding. One morning, Natasha was interviewed by a journalist writing a long-form profile for a major business magazine. Near the end of the interview, the journalist asked about the viral gala video. That moment of humiliation has been viewed millions of times. How do you feel knowing that your worst moment is permanently available online? Natasha thought about it. I've made peace with it. Yes, it was terrible. Yes, it's available forever. But it's also a reminder that our worst moments don't define us unless we let them. That video shows me being humiliated, but it also shows me walking away with dignity. People watching it see both things. They see what was done to me and they see how I responded. I'm proud of the response. Do you think the video helped your story resonate with so many people? Probably. It provided concrete evidence of something that women experience constantly but in subtler ways. Being dismissed, being told you don't belong, being made to feel small. Henry did that publicly, but countless people do it privately every day. The video just made visible something that's usually invisible. One last question. If you could give advice to the woman in that video, the one standing there with wine dripping down her face, what would you tell her? Natasha smiled. I'd tell her that in 6 months she'll be standing on a stage accepting awards and building an empire. I'd tell her that the man who humiliated her is about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. I'd tell her to walk out of that ballroom with her head high, because her real life is about to begin. The profile ran 2 weeks later with the headline, Natasha Warren, from invisible genius to tech empire builder. It was comprehensive and fair, covering her technological innovations, her business acumen, and her role as a voice for women in technology. The article mentioned Henry only briefly, as context for her decision to finally go public. That was appropriate. Henry was context, not content. A footnote in her story, not the plot. On the anniversary of the gala incident, exactly 1 year after wine hit her face, Natasha hosted a breakfast for women entrepreneurs at a restaurant overlooking the city. 50 women attended, ranging from early-stage founders to established business owners. They shared stories, traded advice, and built connections that would last beyond the morning. At the end of the breakfast, Natasha stood to speak. 1 year ago today, I was publicly humiliated by someone who thought I was insignificant. He poured wine on me and called me unworthy. In that moment, I felt small and powerless. But that moment was also the beginning of everything that came after. It was the moment I decided to stop hiding and start claiming my place in the world. She looked around at the faces watching her, seeing recognition and respect. Every single person here has faced moments where someone tried to make you feel small. Maybe it was public, maybe it was private, but it happened. The question isn't whether you'll face dismissal or doubt. The question is what you'll build in spite of it. Will you let other people's limited vision become your ceiling? Or will you break through and show them what you're really capable of? The response was immediate and energetic. Women stood and applauded, not for Natasha specifically, but for the permission she was giving them to take up space and claim their achievements. After the breakfast, Natasha walked through the city streets back to her office. It was a beautiful morning, clear and cool, full of possibility. She passed businesses and buildings and people pursuing their own dreams, each one part of the complex ecosystem of urban life. She thought about Henry briefly, wondering if he ever walked these streets or if he'd built a new life entirely separate from this place. It didn't matter. Their lives had diverged completely as they should have. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, hiding her brilliance and making herself small. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more authentic. She thought about the future, which stretched out before her, full of opportunities to build and create and inspire. At Sterling Innovations' office, her assistant greeted her with a schedule full of meetings and opportunities. A tech giant wanted to discuss partnership opportunities. A venture capital firm invited her to join their advisory board. 3 universities requested her as a commencement speaker. Natasha reviewed the list and made her selections. Time was finite, so she chose the opportunities that aligned with her values and vision. Building the empire wasn't just about business success. It was about using that success to create change, to make space for others, to prove that excellence didn't require permission. That evening, sitting in her office with the city lights spreading below her, Natasha drafted an email to her mentorship program participants. "Your success doesn't require anyone else's approval," she wrote. "It requires your work, your vision, and your willingness to be visible. Don't wait for the world to recognize you. Recognize yourself. The rest will follow." She hit send and closed her laptop, satisfied that the message was true because she'd lived it. The journey from hidden to visible had been difficult and painful and ultimately transformative. She wouldn't wish the pain on anyone, but she'd recommend the visibility to everyone. The empire she'd built wasn't just Sterling Innovations or her wealth or her reputation. It was the life she'd constructed on her own terms, without hiding and without apology. It was the community of women she'd helped and inspired. It was the technological innovations that would outlast her. It was the proof that brilliance doesn't require permission and success doesn't require making yourself smaller. Henry had tried to humiliate her into invisibility. Instead, he'd pushed her into the light. That was his lasting contribution to her story, and she supposed she should thank him for it. But she wouldn't. Because she didn't think about him anymore. The empire had risen. The revenge was complete. The story was told. What remained was simply living, building, creating, inspiring, and refusing to be invisible ever again. Natasha Warren, once hidden, now stood exactly where she belonged. And the view from here was extraordinary.